When I was accepted to be a moderator, I was ecstatic. Finally, I could be a part of the great work here on Nosleep. I would fully apply my passion for horror in keeping this community healthy and true to its innovative niche. When you're working on a sub like Nosleep with millions of subscribers and thousands of active users, it's essential you know your business. The work is far more complex than winding up word count bots. There are tremendous expectations on one's knowledge of all things horror, which necessitates a standard level of competency from all mods. They required me to meet that standard by attending orientation. My acceptance email detailed a physical address where the training would take place. I was initially surprised it wasn't being conducted online. It was a fleeting thought, however. I wasn't joining some small-time operation. This was the premier destination for written horror on the internet. I was to meet an instructor by the name of Camden on the 3rd floor at an address my phone said was downtown. I went through the main doors of one of those old factory buildings. The place was so ancient and centrally located, it was inexplicable no one had demolished it for more condos. I found the reception area on the 3rd floor easily enough and sat in an uncomfortable metal chair. The only other furniture in the room was a vacant reception desk, complete with an old boxy monitor. The place was dusty and run down. I surmised it must have been the cheapest place to hold this meeting. It suited me fine. If anything, the creepy vibe really set the tone for our discussion. There was a door on each wall with a discoloring where nameplates once resided. The rooms probably belonged to managers or foremen when the place was operational. I waited about 15 minutes past the scheduled meeting time when the door I entered through burst open. A woman wearing a pinstripe dress walked to the center of the room. She had blonde hair pulled up into a tight bun and was tapping away on a tablet. "Hello, I started. She spun. "Yes, Kylie, I know. Pleasure." She rattled off in a perfunctory tone without looking up from her tablet. She gave a vague flick of her wrist towards the door on the right and told me my first task was through there. I bristled at the terse greeting, but appreciated her authority and obvious commitment to work. I discovered a similarly ruined office. Peeling green wallpaper streaked the walls and yellowed paper huddled in heaps. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy windows on the far wall, which dyed the room a drab brown. I heard the door lock behind me. I thought it was a cute touch. The latch was on my side. It harkened to a time I played one of those escape rooms. With no obvious supervision or direction, I inferred my task must be to discover something. There was little in the way of furniture, just an armchair with shredded upholstery positioned behind an old wooden desk. A wardrobe skulked in the corner to my left. I trudged through the debris and started rifling through desk drawers. I stopped when I heard a thump contrast with my shuffling papers. Another thump, and I knew something was here with me. The intensity of the noise increased, and I zeroed in on the wardrobe. My breath caught in the back of my throat as I inched towards the sound. My senses heightened for any clue as to what could be banging against the rotten doors of the wardrobe. The burst of splintering wood shocked me all the more when the doors exploded open. A stiff, bony leg planted itself on the floor and dragged the rest of its clattering form out. Crust and dust flaked off of aged joints as what appeared to be anatomically human unfolded itself. Its head creaked up, revealing the indifferent gaze of a sightless skull. I took a step back and the thing lunged at me. Its movements were now fluid and its composition lithe. I took back everything I thought about this being a cheap operation. They must have spared no expense on an animatronic of this quality. I understood. I understood that in order to vet stories for true horror, I had to experience it myself. The terror I felt was exquisite. The fear mixed with gratitude. It was invaluable to have a personal objective standard with which I could reference to sanction stories. Despite my rationalization that this was a simulation, I instinctively ran towards the door. The thing dove to intercept my sudden start, and a claw-like grip closed around my ankle, tripping me. I threw my arms out and landed hard. It was getting too real. I didn't sign anything that gave them consent to actually harm me. I tried to pop onto my knees to protest when searing pain exploded under my left shoulder blade. The momentum of the strike pinned me to the ground, and I felt the fingers of the creature rend and twist in the wound. I felt its other hand pierce through my clothed in flesh. It was rooting around in my lungs, literally stealing my breath. In my terror and confusion, I thought this must be a mistake. The adrenaline gave way to shock, and I started to fade. The clunk of the door lock mingled with the squelching sounds of my gore. It took everything I had to lift my head and see black high heels clicking towards me. Everything went dark as I reached out to her. And then I was back in the waiting room. I breathed in the sweet, musty air. My body was whole. How had she done this? Did she drug me? I went to leave only to find the door I originally entered through was simply a smooth wall. I was furious that they'd go this far. I demanded to be allowed to leave immediately. I told her I got the message, but I wouldn't go through a near-death experience just to learn some stupid lesson about fear, let alone to be a moderator on Reddit. "You've learned nothing," she murmured. "And you absolutely will help." The door behind the reception desk creaked open and a brilliant light flooded the room. Something jumped onto my chest and it startled me awake. My cat bounded off of me and ran into the kitchen. I was home, lying on the couch. I bolted to the windows only to find a beautiful spring day. My husband Luke was filling goodie bags at the dining table with his foot rocking a cradle. Our youngest, Sophie, was asleep inside. Ben skipped into the room with a foil 4 balloon. He gave me a hug, and I stood there, shocked. Luke noticed me scanning the room, wild-eyed. He told Ben to go join the other kids outside and go for a jump. It wasn't a dream. This felt as real as that decrepit building. I told him the entire story. His contempt turned into genuine concern. But not because of believing me. He told me I'd been reading too many scary stories and that the priority was our son's birthday. I went into the backyard to find happy kids and conversing parents. A small bounce house teemed with laughter. The Hendersons arrived and their little one ran off to join the writhing mass of sugar-fueled chaos. I was still glancing around nervously when Mrs. Henderson asked where the birthday boy was. A van emblazoned with Snickers the Clown pulled out of the driveway. Hey, did you pay the clown?" I called. "What clown?" asked Luke. And then there was a flash of white, and I awoke on my couch. Sometimes I remembered nothing. Sometimes I remembered remembering nothing. In those cases, I'd go months shut in or just driving, knowing there were no consequences. Invariably, I had realized the antecedent to some horrible event, and in a flash, it would all reset. The final time, I thought it was a hot summer, and as per my usual reset routine, I just hopped in the car and left without a word. My family members were often the victims of these scenarios, so it was imperative I get as far away as possible. I spent a few hours in a cafe ruminating and planning my next moves. My phone blew up with messages, as it usually did when Luke realized things were off. I returned to the car to find Sophie strapped into the back seat. The flash of a reset brought me to the waiting room. The weight of everything I'd seen crashed down on me. I watched my loved ones damned to grisly fates over and over again. It was effectively real. Even if this was some trick or a hallucination or something, I had spent more time in these scenarios than I had lived in my first life. The memories of all these resets inundated me. Connections to events and people in different instances overlapped and took on new meaning. An exponential series of chain reactions compounded as I came close to grasping the full implications of the abominations that took place. Pieces of me doomed to die those ghastly deaths. Many, I felt, were more me than I was. The instances were so intricately intertwined that I knew these scenarios continued on without me. And nothing had actually happened to me. When I had no memory of this torture, at no point before a reset did I feel any fear. The fear was not for me in this case. It was horrifying because it was horrible. Camden looked up from her work and flashed a sinister grin. You must go through one more door. For prosperity, which would you prefer? I dug my nails into the first door and pleaded to be rent limb from limb by the revenant within. The skeleton popping out of the closet was so much more desirable than even one of those resets. She chuckled and seemed to make note of my response. The final door swung open. An inky black mass seeped into the waiting room. Camden paid no attention to the plutonian tendrils that enveloped her in the space. I pressed myself into a corner in a futile attempt to avoid the gaping abyss. I consider this the moment I ceased to be. I'm fairly confident versions of me persisted and died during the first 2 trials. Cowering in that corner, as scared as I was. At least it was real to me. At least, it was real to me. Those last few seconds in the waiting room were the freshest memories I had for the eons that would follow. I found myself floating in the void of space. My only faculty sight. Stretching on forever were stars and nebulae. My other senses strained uselessly to detect anything. The first few days and weeks I spent coming to terms with the phantom sensations. How mundane it was to feel unseen hands stroke my face or hear my name rumble throughout all the universe. I could spend a decade crying, a century screaming. It all melded into the same annihilation of existence. I was concurrently nothing, and the only thing to bear witness to that, nothing. Massive celestial bodies that I would take as static for millennia would all at once shift with a nimble dexterity that evidenced sentience. My perception eventually developed into a constant flux of time and space. I swapped sizes with galaxies and atoms in a continuous mind-melting undulation. I was cursed with an immunity to the relentless march of oblivion and glimpsed its pestilence unfold on a cosmic scale. This fear wasn't personally visceral. It wasn't for someone else. It simply was. It was dread. I was merely an arbitrary, ephemeral vessel. After an eternity, a millisecond, I was sitting at the reception desk in the waiting room in front of an old computer. My task set before me. I feel the full extent of my ordeal hovering just on my peripheral, like an ocean held at bay by a thread. Paradoxically, it takes a conscious effort to avoid coming into contact with it. If it ever broke, I'd surely ruin this numb husk I've become. I assume I'm being assisted with this. I can only access Nosleep and users relevant to my work. All I can do is respond to messages and reports. I've tried a few times to call for help, even made coded distress signals. The message just changes or deletes itself after I hit send. It leads me to conclude that my work here is completely pointless. It takes far more effort to imprison and censor me than I exert responding to rule violations or what have you. The stories have suddenly stopped. I just have a blanket statement to respond to blackout inquiries. I finally had a long enough break to write out my story and see if posting it works. I don't know how long they'll let this stay up. I have the fondest memories of that sweet nothing between resets. I'd do anything to get a similar reprieve from existence. Until now, I've never had a chance to stop. No rest. No sleep.